Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I will start the presentation with the definition of corruption. Corruption is an act of using a position of power improperly for personal gain to help a friend or family at the expense of the wider public or both. Those who engage in such conduct will be considered as immoral. Although it might be helpful to think corruption in terms of power, this does not entail that only political power is involved. For instance, it may denote financial strength and so on. Power abuse may happen both legally and illegally, and these two scenarios represent different aspects of the corruption process. For example, the practice of paying a bribe to obtain preferential treatment for something that the receiver is legally compelled to undertake, which is known as facilitation payment. So the bribe is paid in violation of the law to get services that the receiver is not allowed to obtain. New Public Management, or NPM, is the name of a reform package aimed at public sectors. NPM is inspired by a broad management ideology and contemporary institutional economic theory, and some of its characteristics are market orientation, devolution, managerialism, orientation towards output-driven policies and structure, and also implementation of measurable performance indicators. So, NPM ideas can be categorized into two main strands. The first strand of ideas emphasize managerial improvement and restructuring, which includes decentralization, disaggregation, and downsizing. In this strand, NPM is seen as a good managerial approach, contending that a good managerial approach is result-oriented, which is efficiency, effectiveness, and service quality. NPM is intended to improve the quality of public services, save public expenditure, and improve the efficiency of governmental operations, and also make policy implementation more effective. And the other strand of NPM idea emphasize markets and competition, which include contracting out and adopting private sector styles of management practice. In this second strand, NPM can be defined as a set of particular management approaches and techniques which are mainly borrowed from the private sector and applied in the public sector. It is also perceived as an ideology based on belief in the efficacy of markets and competition and business-like management ideas and practices. More recently, NPM involved the use of market or market-like mechanism for the delivery of public services, including privatization, contracting out, and the development of internal markets. The fact that NPM promotes transparency in the public sector, it can also lead to unscrupulous behaviors because NPM can erode ethical norms and contribute to corruption in wealthy countries. For example, the increase of managerial autonomy has resulted in blurred accountability and a higher risk for public managers to become corrupt. And the increase of managerial freedom within public sector's organization also allows for more opportunities for unethical behavior.
Next, I will explain the causes of corruption. The first cause of corruption is due to the political and economic environment. The more a country's economic activity is restricted, the greater the power of officials in making decisions that lead to the greater risk of corruption. For example, the Malaysian Anti-Corruption Commission, known as MACC, has identified the procurement and enforcement sectors as important contributors to corruption in the country. In the political environment, if the top of politics, such as the government and senior politicians, are corrupt, then corruption will propagate to all levels, and this crime will spread to the general public as well. The MACC and Attorney General's chambers, for example, lack the independence to handle major corruption cases like the 1MDB and FELDA when they first emerged due to the political influence and an excessive concentration of authority in the administration. Second cause of corruption is due to professional ethics and legislation. The ineffective sanctioning of corruption has a significant impact as it raises the likelihood of individuals involved continuing their corruptive behavior. Besides that, it also results in a lack of openness and scrutiny by supervisory bodies. For instance, the constraints imposed on the public sector in responding to the current crisis, such as COVID-19 epidemic, create great potential for corruption. Lastly, due to the lack of public unity, if a person wants to get his work done, he does so through corruption and then condemns the corrupt official later. If the public stands together against corruption and no one is willing to pay bribes to get their work done, corrupt officials will have no choice but to operate without corruption. Politicians, for example, use money and other incentives to attract voters during elections.
Okay, so I'm going to explain briefly about the consequences of prolonged corruption in terms of political, social and also economic. So the first one is in terms of political. So corruption that happen for a very long time in the administration will lead to loss of trust to the government. So this is because it violates the social contract between the ordinary citizen and also the government. So trust is very important because it relates to better working and also efficiency, especially in terms of public compliance to civic behavior. Okay, the second consequences can be seen in terms of social, where long-term corruption will lead to poverty and also inequality. So we can see in a famous case in Nigeria, which involved one of the biggest oil company, which is Shell, where $1.1 billion were at cost because it went to public official rather than the national budget. At the same time, in Nigeria, there are more than half of the population that lives in poverty. So this shows that how wealth is transferred to the least needy because of corruption that happened, and the most needy can enjoy the wealth of the country. Okay, last but not least is in terms of economic. So corruption that happened for a very long time will affect the economic development of a country. So this is because corruption will create unfavorable environment to the foreign investor. So the corruption will influence their decision to invest in a country, which will impede the economic development of the country.
Okay, so now I'm going to explain about the shift from the traditional public administration to new public management from the perspective of Malaysia. So the main changes in the system is the shift from the centralized management style to decentralization. The decentralization has increased the concentration of managerial power among the leaders or the top management in an organization. So according to Klitgard, the degree of monopoly power and discretion enjoyed by members in an organization has a beneficial impact on corruption. So this decentralization has solve the imbalance between the federal government and also the state government in terms of the management. So therefore, the decentralization, the power between the federal and state has been distinguished. So the clear example of how decentralization and high managerial power could lead to corruption is the 1MDB case. The 1MDB scandal has occurred due to too much of power that someone holds, which then lead to the abuse of power and corrupt behavior. So 1MDB, or known as the One Malaysia Development Berhad, is a 2009 set up project to fund development through partnership and also to promote the foreign investment, which has Datuk Seri Najib as the chairman. So when the scandal happened, the most serious trial against him include 25 allegations, which include the transfer of $731 from 1MDB fund to his own account, showing that he has abused his power and being a corrupt leader. Okay, so next, I will now explain the financial management reform in Malaysia during the shift from the traditional public administration to new public management. So the traditional financial budgeting system start with the line item budget. Then few reform happens due to the weaknesses, which includes the program and performance budgeting system, which focusing on the output, the program that has been carried out, and then reform happened, which it has been reformed to modified budgeting system known as MBS, and then it continued to reform to the outcome-based budgeting system, and then the current system that we are using now is the zero-based budgeting system. So all these four are actually the types of budgeting system throughout the financial management reform in Malaysia.
To fight against corruption, the government need to create an oversight bodies other than the MACC. This is because MACC need another body to act as a watchdog over the MACC itself. This is because no bodies that act alone can actually reduce the corruption. Next is to amend the Sanctions Act for corruption. This is because people are not scared to commit corruption, as the punishment is too light. The Anti-Corruption Act, Section 575, 1997, can be played by the rich people as they are rich enough to pay the sanction as for them to be released from the sanction itself. Lastly, leader, as the government need to hire the one who is truly qualified and must be integrity, honest, and good enough to lead. This is very important as leader will get such an authority that can actually lead to the corruption scene.